The elevator doors are about to close. Inside, wealthy guests in furs and diamonds watch in uncomfortable silence as their hotel's assistant manager blocks a scruffy man in work clothes from entering. "Sir, this elevator is for hotel guests only." The man in the baseball cap looks up quietly. His voice is soft, almost apologetic. "I am a hotel guest." The assistant manager's tone hardens. "I'm going to need to see proof. This is a luxury establishment, and we have certain standards we need to maintain." What those guests didn't know, what the assistant manager couldn't have imagined in his worst nightmare, was that the man he was humiliating, the man he was judging by his worn jeans and scuffed boots, owned the entire building they were standing in. But here's what's really shocking. What happened next wasn't revenge. It wasn't the explosive anger you'd expect from a man worth millions being treated like trash. What Elvis Presley did in that elevator would be talked about for decades. It would reshape an entire industry, and it would reveal something about real power that most people never learn in their entire lives. Because sometimes the most devastating response to being treated like you're nothing is showing everyone what treating people like they're something actually looks like. The question is, when you have the power to destroy someone who humiliated you, when you could ruin their career with a single word, when everyone would understand and even applaud your revenge, what do you do? What Elvis did that night became legendary, but the real shock wasn't his response. It was what happened to the man who tried to throw the king of rock and roll out of his own hotel. March 15, 1974, Memphis, Tennessee. Rain is hammering the streets like God himself is angry. The kind of storm that makes you want to stay inside, close the curtains, and pretend the world doesn't exist. But Elvis Presley is driving through those flooded streets in a car nobody would ever associate with the king of rock and roll. Not one of his famous Cadillacs, not the pink one, not the gold one, not any of the fleet that usually announces his presence before he even arrives. Tonight he's behind the wheel of a modest rental sedan. Gray, ordinary, the kind of car an insurance salesman might drive, and that's exactly the point. Elvis parks outside the International Hotel Memphis, and for a moment he just sits there, watching the rain cascade down his windshield. This hotel, this beautiful, gleaming monument to Southern hospitality and luxury, represents everything he's worked for. 2 years ago, when it opened, he'd stood in that same spot filled with pride. Tonight, he's filled with dread. Because for months now, letters have been arriving at Graceland. Not fan mail, not requests for autographs or concert tickets. These are complaint letters, angry letters, letters that make his stomach turn every time he reads them. Guest after guest writing to tell him about staff members who judge people by their clothes, about front desk workers who give cold shoulders to anyone who doesn't look wealthy enough, about doormen who ignore certain types of people while fawning over others. The kind of discrimination that cuts Elvis to his core because he remembers being that kid, the poor kid from Tupelo, the one who didn't belong in fancy places, the one who got looked at like he was dirt on someone's shoe just because his family didn't have money. His mama, Gladys, had cleaned houses for wealthy families in Memphis. She told him stories about how differently people treated her depending on what she was wearing. Same woman, same kind heart, same sharp intelligence, but if she was in her work clothes instead of her Sunday dress, she might as well have been invisible. "Baby," she used to tell him, "you judge a person by what's in their heart, not what's on their back." Now, sitting in this rental car, Elvis is about to find out if his own employees learned that lesson. He gets out of the car, and if you passed him on the street, you'd never recognize him. The famous hair is hidden under a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. The perfectly groomed sideburns are barely visible. He deliberately didn't shave that morning, giving him a rough, working man's stubble. His clothes are the kind you'd find at any department store. Faded jeans with actual wear marks, not the designer kind. A dark jacket that's seen better days. Work boots that look like they've actually been worked in. He looks like every maintenance worker, every delivery driver, every honest man trying to make a living who's ever felt small walking into a place that seemed too good for him. But here's what makes this moment even more significant. This isn't Elvis's first undercover mission. For months, he's been doing this, showing up at his restaurants unrecognized, walking into his other business ventures looking like just another customer, watching, listening, learning how his employees treat people when they think no one important is looking. And what he's discovered has broken his heart over and over again. The doorman at one of his restaurants ignored an elderly black woman for 20 minutes while she waited in the rain. A waiter at another establishment gave terrible service to a young couple because they looked too young to leave a good tip. Front desk clerks at his hotels treating people differently based on the car they drove up in. Each incident was like a knife to his chest because it went against everything his mama had taught him, everything he believed about treating people with dignity and respect. Tonight, he's conducting his most important test yet. The International Hotel Memphis was his crown jewel, the place he was most proud of. If discrimination was happening here, if his staff was treating people poorly based on how they looked, then he had failed in the most fundamental way. As Elvis walks toward the elegant entrance, every step feels heavy. Part of him hopes he won't find what he's looking for. Part of him already knows he will. The hotel lobby is bustling with activity. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across marble floors. Well-dressed guests move through the space with the confidence of people who belong. Everything looks perfect, exactly as he'd envisioned when he invested in this place. But Elvis isn't looking at the architecture anymore. He's watching the people, and what he sees makes his heart sink. The front desk staff greet wealthy-looking guests with bright smiles and enthusiastic assistance. But when a middle-aged couple in modest clothes approaches, the service becomes noticeably colder, more perfunctory. The same staff, the same training, but completely different treatment based on appearance. Marcus, the young doorman, barely acknowledges Elvis as he enters. No greeting, no offer of assistance, just a brief glance and a dismissive look away. This was a man Elvis had specifically instructed to welcome every guest warmly, regardless of how they looked. Elvis makes his way across the lobby, his work boots clicking against the marble floors he'd personally selected. Every detail of this place reflected his vision of Southern hospitality combined with world-class luxury. But the vision was failing, corrupted by the very prejudices he'd worked his whole life to overcome. He reaches the bank of elevators that will take him to his penthouse suite, the suite he maintains for his personal use, though he rarely stays here anymore. Tonight, he just wants to get upstairs, collect his thoughts, and figure out how to address what he's seeing. As he waits for the elevator, he continues to observe. A businessman in an expensive suit gets immediate, fawning attention from hotel staff. A working-class family with children gets polite but distant service. The pattern is clear, consistent, and heartbreaking. When the elevator finally arrives, Elvis steps forward along with several other guests. These are clearly affluent people, the women in designer dresses and fur coats, the men in perfectly tailored suits. They belong in this world of luxury and privilege. Elvis, in his disguise, does not. That's when a hand shoots out to block his path. The hand belongs to Thomas Richardson, the assistant manager, a man in his 40s, impeccably dressed, with the kind of confidence that comes from having a little authority and being very sure of how to use it. "Excuse me, sir," Richardson says, his tone polite but firm. "This elevator is reserved for hotel guests only. I'm going to have to ask you to use the service elevator around the corner." Elvis looks up, genuinely confused, not because he doesn't understand what's happening, but because it's even worse than he feared. He's not just being discriminated against, he's being ejected from his own building. "I am a hotel guest," he says quietly, his voice calm despite the growing tension he feels inside. Richardson looks him up and down with barely concealed disgust. The worn jeans, the casual jacket, the baseball cap hiding the most famous hair in America. To Richardson, Elvis looks like exactly what he's pretending to be, a working-class man who doesn't belong in a luxury hotel. Sir, I'm going to need to see your room key or registration confirmation. This is a luxury establishment, and we have certain standards we need to maintain. The other guests in the elevator watch this exchange with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Some look embarrassed by Richardson's behavior. Others seem to approve, nodding slightly as if this is exactly the kind of exclusivity they expect from a high-end hotel. Elvis doesn't have a room key with him. He uses a special access code for his penthouse suite, and he'd left his wallet with his identification in his other jacket. But that's not the point anymore. The point is that his worst fears about his own business have just been confirmed in the most personal way possible. I don't have a room key with me at the moment, Elvis replies honestly, but I can assure you I belong here. Richardson's expression hardens. Sir, I'm going to have to insist that you either provide proof of your guest status or use the appropriate elevator. We cannot allow non-guests to use our main elevators. It's a matter of security and guest comfort. Elvis feels the familiar flash of temper that he usually keeps carefully controlled, but he forces himself to remain calm. This is exactly the kind of discrimination he came to investigate, and he's experiencing it firsthand. Part of him wants to reveal his identity immediately and watch Richardson's face crumble. But a wiser part of him realizes something profound is happening here. This isn't just about one prejudiced employee. This is a teaching moment that could change everything, not just for Richardson, but for everyone witnessing this interaction and potentially for an entire industry. The elevator has become a classroom, and Elvis Presley, disguised as the very type of person his staff has been mistreating, is about to deliver a lesson that no one will ever forget. I understand you're trying to do your job, Elvis says, his voice remaining steady and respectful despite the fire burning in his chest. But I'm curious, what exactly about my appearance makes you think I don't belong here? Richardson shifts uncomfortably, clearly not expecting the question. Most people in this situation would either get angry and storm off, or meekly accept the humiliation and slink away to the service elevator. This man is doing neither. Well, sir, it's not about your appearance per se. It's about our policies. No, Elvis interrupts gently but firmly. Let's be honest about what's happening here. You looked at my clothes, at the way I'm dressed, and you made a judgment about whether I deserve the same treatment as these other folks. Isn't that right? The elevator has grown completely silent. Even the other guests, the wealthy ones who Richardson is so eager to protect, are now paying close attention to this unexpected confrontation. There's something magnetic about this scruffy man in work clothes who speaks with such quiet authority, such unshakable dignity. Richardson glances around nervously, realizing that the situation is spiraling beyond his control. The other guests are watching. Hotel staff in the lobby have started to notice the commotion. This was supposed to be a simple matter of maintaining standards, but it's becoming something much more complicated. Sir, I'm simply following hotel policy, Richardson insists, though his voice lacks conviction. Elvis nods thoughtfully, as if he's genuinely considering this explanation. I see, and whose policy is that exactly? Who decided that a person's worth should be measured by their clothing? At this point, some of the other guests begin to speak up. An elderly woman in an expensive fur coat says, "Young man, you're being unnecessarily harsh. Can't you see this gentleman is perfectly respectable?" A businessman in a three-piece suit adds, "This is getting ridiculous. We're all going to be late for our appointments." But Elvis holds up his hand gently, asking for their patience. "Actually, I appreciate what y'all are trying to do, but this is important. Mr. Richardson here is about to learn something valuable, and so are the rest of us." Richardson is now looking increasingly uncomfortable and confused. This isn't how these situations usually play out. Usually, when he exercises his authority to exclude someone, they either leave quietly or make a scene that justifies his actions. This man is doing neither. He's turning it into a philosophical discussion and somehow making Richardson look like the unreasonable one. "Sir, I don't understand what you're trying to." "Let me tell you a story," Elvis says, settling back against the elevator wall as if he has all the time in the world. And this is where everything changes. Not just for Richardson, not just for the guests in that elevator, but for everyone who would hear this story in the years to come. When I was a boy, my mama used to clean houses for wealthy families. She'd get all dressed up in her one good dress when she went to work, because she had pride in herself and her job. But sometimes, she'd have to run errands afterward while still wearing her cleaning clothes. The elevator is now completely silent, except for Elvis's soft southern drawl. Even Richardson has stopped protesting and is listening intently. She told me about how differently people treated her depending on what she was wearing. The same woman, the same kind heart, the same intelligence, but people would either respect her or dismiss her based on whether she was in her Sunday best or her work clothes. There's something hypnotic about the way Elvis tells this story. His voice carries the weight of lived experience, of lessons learned the hard way. The wealthy guests find themselves drawn in despite themselves. This isn't what they expected when they stepped into this elevator. Now my mama taught me that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. That businessman over there in the nice suit, maybe he's on his way to the hospital to see a sick relative. That lady in the beautiful dress, maybe she's celebrating something wonderful, or maybe she's trying to put on a brave face during the worst day of her life. He pauses, looking directly at Richardson. And me, standing here in my work clothes, well, maybe I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, learning exactly what I need to learn. Richardson is beginning to look genuinely troubled, as if he's starting to understand that he's made a serious error in judgment. But he doesn't know how serious. He can't possibly imagine that he's just humiliated one of the most famous men in the world, a man who could end his career with a phone call. The thing is, Mr. Richardson, Elvis continues, true hospitality isn't about serving only the people who look like they can afford it. True hospitality is about treating every human being with dignity and respect, because you never know who you're really talking to. At this moment, something shifts in the elevator. The other guests are no longer just uncomfortable observers. They're witnesses to something profound, something they'll remember for the rest of their lives. The elderly woman in the fur coat has tears in her eyes. The businessman has forgotten all about his appointments. Richardson looks like a man who's just had the foundation of his worldview cracked open. Sir, I think maybe I was too hasty in my... Oh, you weren't too hasty, Elvis says with a slight smile that doesn't reach his eyes. You were being exactly who you are. The question is that who you want to be? But even as Elvis speaks these words, he can see movement in the lobby through the glass elevator doors. Hotel staff members are gathering. Someone has recognized him despite his disguise, and word is spreading through the building like wildfire. James Morrison, the general manager, is pushing through the crowd of staff members, his face pale with what looks like panic. Behind him, other employees are whispering urgently to each other, pointing toward the elevator. Richardson, still focused on Elvis, hasn't noticed the commotion in the lobby. He's too busy trying to process what just happened to him, too busy trying to understand how a simple matter of hotel policy turned into a lesson about human dignity. Sir, I want you to know that I'm not usually. The elevator doors open at the ground floor. Mr. Presley, James Morrison exclaims, rushing toward them with a face full of embarrassment and concern. Sir, I had no idea you were in the building. Please, let me apologize for any inconvenience. And there it is, the moment when Richardson's world completely implodes. His face goes white as the reality crashes over him like a cold wave. Mr. Presley, the man he just tried to eject from the elevator, owns this entire hotel, owns the building they're standing in, owns the job that Richardson now realizes he's about to lose. You own this hotel, Richardson whispers, his voice barely audible. I do, Elvis says simply, but more importantly, I'm a human being who was just treated poorly because of how I'm dressed. And if that's how you treat me, how do you think you're treating other guests who might not have the ability to complain to the owner. The gathered staff members and curious guests watch in fascination as Elvis continues, his voice never rising above a conversational tone, but carrying unmistakable authority. "See, here's what I think happened tonight, Mr. Richardson. I think you saw someone who didn't meet your expectations of what a hotel guest should look like, and you decided to exercise a little power. Maybe you were having a bad day, or maybe you've been taught that appearances matter more than character. But whatever the reason, you forgot the most important rule of hospitality." Elvis pauses, letting the words hang in the air. "Treat everyone like they might be the most important person you'll ever meet." Richardson looks as if he might faint. The color has drained from his face completely, and his hands are shaking. "Mr. Presley, I am so sorry. I had no idea. Please, let me explain." "Actually," Elvis says, his tone becoming warmer, "I think you've already explained perfectly. You've shown me exactly what I needed to see." Morrison starts to speak, clearly intending to fire Richardson on the spot, but Elvis stops him with a look. This is the moment that separates legends from ordinary men. This is where Elvis Presley proves that real power isn't about revenge or humiliation. It's about something much more profound. "The question now is," Elvis says, looking directly at Richardson, "what are we going to do about it?" Richardson is trembling, not just his hands now, but his whole body. The weight of what he's done is crushing down on him like a physical force. He's humiliated Elvis Presley, the Elvis Presley, in front of witnesses, in Elvis's own hotel. Morrison steps forward, his jaw set with the kind of determination that comes before a firing. "Mr. Presley, I want you to know that this kind of behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Mr. Richardson will be terminated immediately, and I'll personally ensure." "Hold on, James," Elvis says, raising his hand. "Let me ask Mr. Richardson something first." The crowd that has gathered, hotel staff, curious guests, even some people from the street who have heard the commotion, falls silent. Everyone expects this to be the moment of destruction, the moment when the king uses his power to annihilate the man who dared to disrespect him. Elvis turns back to Richardson, whose face is now streaked with tears he's trying desperately to hide. "Tell me something, Mr. Richardson. When you woke up this morning, did you plan to hurt anybody today?" The question catches Richardson completely off guard. What?" Simple question. When you got dressed, had your coffee, drove to work, were you thinking, today I'm going to make someone feel small? Today I'm going to judge someone by their clothes and make them feel like they don't matter? Richardson's voice is barely a whisper. "No, sir, I never meant to hurt anyone." "I believe you," Elvis says, and the genuine warmth in his voice shocks everyone present. "I believe you're not a cruel man. I believe you probably got into the hospitality business because you wanted to make people happy, to give them good experiences." Richardson nods, unable to speak. "So what happened? How did we get from there to here?" For a moment, Richardson struggles to find words. Then, like a dam bursting, it all pours out. I was taught that maintaining standards meant keeping certain types of people out, that luxury meant exclusivity, that our wealthy guests expected not to be around people who looked." He trails off, realizing how ugly his words sound when spoken aloud. "Who looked like me," Elvis finishes gently, "who looked poor, who looked working class, who looked like they didn't belong." "Yes, sir," Richardson whispers, ashamed. Elvis nods slowly, as if this explanation makes perfect sense to him. "And who taught you that?" "Previous managers, other hotels I worked at. It was just how things were done." "How things were done," Elvis repeats. "Well, Mr. Richardson, I'm going to give you a choice, and this choice is going to determine not just your future here, but the kind of man you become." The elderly woman in the fur coat speaks up, her voice filled with emotion. "Mr. Presley, that's the most remarkable response I've ever witnessed. You could destroy this young man, but instead you're trying to teach him." Elvis turns to her with a gentle smile. "Ma'am, my mama always said that everyone deserves a second chance to do better. Besides, destroying Mr. Richardson wouldn't change anything. It wouldn't help the next guest who gets judged by their appearance. It wouldn't make our industry better. It would just be revenge. He looks back at Richardson, but transformation, that could change everything. Morrison is staring at Elvis in amazement. In 30 years of hospitality management, he's never seen anything like this. Sir, what? What did you have in mind? Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Richardson, Elvis says, his voice taking on the authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. For the next month, you're going to work every position in this hotel. Doorman, bellhop, housekeeper, restaurant server, maintenance worker. You're going to see this place from the perspective of every person who works here and every guest who walks through those doors. Richardson's eyes widen. This isn't termination. This isn't humiliation. This is something entirely different. You're going to learn what it feels like to be judged by your uniform instead of your character. You're going to experience how guests treat you when they think you're just a housekeeper or just a maintenance worker. And at the end of that month, if you can honestly tell me that you understand what true hospitality means, then we'll talk about your future here. The businessman in the three-piece suit shakes his head in disbelief. Sir, that's incredibly generous. But Elvis isn't finished. Here's the most important part, he continues, his voice carrying the passion of someone who believes deeply in what he's saying. Starting tomorrow, this hotel is implementing a new policy. Every staff member, from management down to entry level, is going to spend time working with local community organizations, homeless shelters, food banks, soup kitchens. The crowd murmurs in surprise. This isn't just about Richardson anymore. This is about systemic change. Because if we're going to be in the business of hospitality, we need to understand what it really means to serve others, especially those who might not be able to give us anything in return. Richardson looks up, his eyes red but filled with something that wasn't there before. Hope maybe, or determination. Mr. Presley, he says, his voice stronger now, I want to do this. I want to learn. I want to be better. Elvis studies his face for a long moment. I believe you do, but here's what I need you to understand. This isn't just about keeping your job. This is about becoming the kind of person who makes the world a little bit better just by being in it. An older gentleman who's been watching from the lobby steps forward. Mr. Presley, I'm Harold Blackwood from the Memphis Chamber of Commerce. What you've done here tonight, this could revolutionize how we think about service and hospitality. Elvis shrugs. Mr. Blackwood, I'm not trying to revolutionize anything. I'm just trying to run a business that my mama would be proud of. But even as he says it, Elvis can see the ripple effects beginning. Other hotel managers in the crowd are whispering to each other, already thinking about how they might implement similar programs. The guests who witnessed this are clearly planning to tell everyone they know about what they saw. Morrison clears his throat. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, how long have you been doing this, testing your businesses this way? About 6 months, Elvis admits, and what I've found has broken my heart more times than I can count. But tonight, he looks around at the faces surrounding him, Richardson's tear-streaked but hopeful expression, the admiration in the guests' eyes, the excitement in his staff members' faces. Tonight gives me hope that we can do better. Richardson steps forward, his voice thick with emotion. Mr. Presley, I know I don't deserve this chance, but I swear to you I won't waste it. I'll work harder than I've ever worked in my life. I believe you will, Elvis says. But remember, you're not just working for me, or for this hotel, or even for your job. You're working to become someone who sees the worth in every person they meet. The elderly woman in the fur coat dabs at her eyes with a handkerchief. Young man, she says to Richardson, you're about to receive an education money can't buy. Don't squander it. As the crowd begins to disperse, people are buzzing with excitement and emotion. They've witnessed something unprecedented, power used not to destroy, but to build up, not to humiliate, but to educate. But Elvis knows this is just the beginning. What happens next will determine whether this moment becomes a footnote or a revolution. 6 weeks later, Thomas Richardson is scrubbing floors, in the hotel's basement laundry room. His hands are raw from cleaning chemicals. His back aches from bending over industrial washing machines, and he's never been happier in his life. Because for the first time in his career, he understands what hospitality actually means. 3 weeks into his rotation, working as a bellhop, he carried bags for an elderly black couple visiting from Mississippi. They tipped him modestly, $5, but the woman pressed an extra dollar into his hand and said, "Thank you for treating us like we matter, son." That night, Richardson went home and cried for 2 hours. As a housekeeper, he watched how guests treated him when they thought he was invisible. Some were kind. Others spoke to him like he wasn't human. The difference wasn't in their wealth or status, it was in their character. Working in the soup kitchen downtown, he served homeless veterans who spoke with more dignity and grace than some of the hotel's wealthiest guests. At the food bank, he met working families who were struggling to make ends meet but still volunteered their time to help others. "It changed everything about how I see the world," Richardson would later say. "I realized I wasn't in the business of excluding people. I was in the business of making people feel welcome, valued, respected." But Richardson's transformation was just the beginning. Word of what happened that night spread through Memphis like wildfire. Local newspapers picked up the story, then regional papers, then national news outlets. The elevator incident became a case study in business schools across the country. Hotel chains started implementing what became known as the International Hotel Program. Mandatory cross-training in all positions, required community service, and dignity-first hospitality training. The Ritz-Carlton adopted it. Marriott created their own version. Hilton required their management trainees to spend a month working every job in their hotels. But here's the twist that no one saw coming, the part that makes this story legendary instead of just inspiring. Richardson didn't just complete his month-long rotation. He thrived. He threw himself into every job with genuine passion. He volunteered at shelters on his own time. He studied hospitality management textbooks late into the night. And Elvis, watching this transformation, made a decision that shocked everyone. He promoted Richardson to general manager of another hotel in his chain. Not assistant manager, not back to his old job, general manager. The man who had tried to throw the king of rock and roll out of an elevator became one of Elvis's most trusted employees. "Some people thought I was crazy," Elvis later told a reporter, "but I saw something in Richardson that night. When a man's world falls apart and he chooses to rebuild himself instead of making excuses, that tells you everything you need to know about his character." Richardson ran that hotel for 12 years. It became the most highly rated property in the chain. Staff turnover was virtually non-existent. Guest satisfaction scores were off the charts. Why? Because Richardson never forgot what it felt like to be judged, never forgot what it meant to be on the receiving end of discrimination, never forgot the grace he'd been shown when he deserved punishment. He kept a framed copy of Elvis's words in his office for the rest of his career. True hospitality is about treating every human being with dignity and respect, because you never know who you're really talking to. But the real legacy of that night went far beyond one hotel or even one industry. In 1983, Richardson was invited to speak at the National Hotel Association convention. He told his story to 3,000 hospitality professionals. By the end of his speech, half the audience was in tears. "You never know who you're really talking to," he said, his voice carrying the weight of lived experience. "But more importantly, it shouldn't matter. Every person deserves to be treated with kindness and respect, not because of who they might be, but because of who they are, fellow human beings deserving of dignity." The speech was recorded. It became mandatory viewing at hotel management schools. Richardson became a consultant, traveling the country teaching the principles he'd learned that night in Memphis. But here's the final twist that will give you chills. In 1977, 3 years after the elevator incident, Elvis Presley died at Graceland. The funeral was massive, attended by thousands of fans and celebrities. Among the pallbearers, the men chosen to carry the king to his final rest was Thomas Richardson. The man who once tried to deny Elvis access to an elevator helped carry him home. "He saved my life that night," Richardson said at the funeral. "Not my job, my life. He showed me what it meant to be truly powerful. Real power isn't about having the ability to destroy someone. Real power is having that ability and choosing to build them up instead." Richardson continued working in the hospitality industry until he retired in 1995. Over his career, he trained thousands of employees. Every single one heard the story of the night he met Elvis Presley. Every single one learned that how you treat people when you think nobody important is watching reveals who you really are. The International Hotel Program is still taught in business schools today. It's been credited with revolutionizing customer service across multiple industries, not just hospitality. Hotels, restaurants, retail chains, even medical facilities have adopted variations of the program. The core principle remains the same. True service means treating everyone with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance, status, or ability to reciprocate. In 2010, the hospitality industry established the Elvis Presley Award for Excellence in Human Dignity. It's given annually to hospitality professionals who demonstrate exceptional commitment to treating all people with respect and kindness. The first recipient was Thomas Richardson. But perhaps the most powerful part of this story isn't about Elvis's wealth or fame. It's about what he chose to do with his power when he had every right to use it for destruction. He chose grace over revenge, education over punishment, building up over tearing down. That rainy night in Memphis proved something profound about human nature, that our worst moments can become our greatest teachers if someone cares enough to show us the way. Elvis Presley could have destroyed Thomas Richardson with a word. Instead, he created a legacy that's still changing lives 50 years later. The man they called the king showed us what true royalty looks like. It's not about the crown on your head or the power in your hands. It's about what you do with that power when nobody's watching. It's about lifting people up instead of putting them down. It's about seeing the potential for good in everyone, even when they can't see it in themselves. That's the response that became legendary. That's the night the king showed us what it really means to rule. That night in 1974, Elvis Presley faced a choice that defines every leader: use power to destroy or use it to transform. He chose transformation, and it changed not just one man's life, but an entire industry. Today, when you face someone who's made a mistake, someone who's judged you unfairly, someone who's hurt you when they had the power to help, what choice will you make? Will you choose revenge, or will you choose the harder path of grace? Share your thoughts below, because in a world that often rewards cruelty, choosing kindness is the most revolutionary act of all.